Welcome, folks. We're going to give people just about another 30 seconds to a minute to trickle in here. Got a couple people connecting still. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, we'd love to know who you are and where you're from, especially for our guest presenter, so she knows where you're coming from. I'm seeing a few familiar faces and names, but some new ones too. So would love to know where everybody's from. If you want to drop that in the chat, we'll give people till 2:02 here to get admitted into the room. All right, looks like everyone is connected. This meeting is being recorded, just so you know. There will be time at the end for questions, so feel free to drop those in the chat as we go, or hang on to them till the end. But I'm going to turn it over to Matt, our coordinator for GLIA, Great Lakes Islands Alliance, and he's going to give you a little intro about GLIA if you're new to us, and give some context for why we do these webinars. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Philip. Welcome, everyone. This is the Great Lakes Islands Alliance webinar for August. We've done a couple of these this year. We try to do 3 or 4 a year on a variety of topics that are of interest to island communities. We try to showcase certainly islanders to the extent we can, island case studies, things that are really just derived from your communities. Philip, if you want to go to the next slide, well, I'll let you introduce the speaker in a few slides. I'll just do a bit of a background here. I guess you can see. We'll do just a very brief, probably won't even take 10 minutes, about GLIA. The presentation for today, our guest, we've got at least 35 minutes of that, and then we will try to reserve some time for Q&A discussion at the end. So a little bit about Great Lakes Islands Alliance. The GLIA, as we say, we're a voluntary collaborative binational network. And so we've got people from islands on both sides of the border in Ohio, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, and in the province of Ontario. We bring together people that care about islands, particularly islanders, island leaders, island citizens, and then advocates from around the region. And the mission statement there is shown for GLIA. Really, in a gist, we're about providing access to information, and we understand the value of shared experiences of living, working in an isolated place like an island. Our informal motto, as we say, is island for islands by islands, and so really, again, what we do is driven by the interests of islanders. On the next slide, you'll see a map of the major populated island communities in the Great Lakes. There's about 20 of them. They're all very different, all very unique and special in their own way. We in GLIA, we've got over 250 people now from these different communities, and we're still looking for more. So if you're new to GLIA, visit our website. There'll be a way to sign up and get on our distribution list. Again, the islands are in both the US and Canada and all 5 Great Lakes. And what we've determined over the years, and we've been doing this since about 2017, is that while every island is unique, every community is unique, we've found that islanders have things in common and ultimately can learn from one another. Next slide. So what we do, GLIA supports resilient communities, vibrant, sustainable islands. We have a number of different activities that we work on. Everything is done through a lens of either environmental protection and growing social and economic institutions on islands. We see these things as going hand in hand in most places, but especially on islands, because islands are surrounded by water. You're literally defined by the Great Lakes. And so there's always an interest in environmental stewardship and protection in everything we do. We hold virtual information sharing meetings once a month and an island summit, an in-person event each fall. And that rotates to a different island each time. We've had some replicate hosts, but the island community gets to host it. And we will be having our seventh, I believe, island summit this fall on Mackinac Island. The photos there that you see are a handful of photos from past island summits. So what we do in webinars like today is it's an example of our efforts to connect islanders with subject matter experts and decision makers from around the region and beyond. And with that, I will turn it over to Philip to introduce our guest, and then we'll get into it. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Matt. Well, we are very, very excited to have Jennifer Wixson here with us, who I just learned goes by Jen, so I'm going to call you Jen from now on. Uh, Jen is the professor of early childhood education at North Central Michigan College, and she's also the program coordinator for their childcare program there. Jennifer led a really interesting study on Beaver Island a while back, and that's how she came on our radar, looking at childcare on Beaver Island and possibilities for expanding and developing programs there. So she's got great insight into island networks and communities. She lives right on the coast of the lake, so she knows all about water and all of the challenges that come with Great Lakes communities. So we're really pleased to have her with us this August. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to give you some insights on childcare in island communities.
Thank you so much, Philip, for that kind introduction. And I was so excited to be invited to do this. As a part of what we refer to as the Childcare Initiative here on campus, we get to do a lot of great things, but I think doing this study on Beaver Island has been one of my most favorite things that we did. Visiting Beaver Island in a very intentional way, getting to know many of the families who are really challenged with childcare and trying to parent on the island, a place that they love so much, was incredible. Probably the best part was origin stories. That was every person I met. I wanted to learn more about how they made it to the island and what their history was. And so through the study, we really got to learn so much about the uniqueness of trying to create this type of infrastructure for children and families in a unique island environment. Before I jump into that, let me tell you a little bit more about what we do at North Central Michigan College as part of our Child Care Initiative. As Philip said, I am the professor of early childhood education. I'm the program coordinator for our early childhood education programming, as well as our teacher education programming that we do here. North Central Michigan College is a two-year community college located in Petoskey. So we have an amazing campus, but we offer a lot of online opportunities as well. In addition to those roles, I also started the Child Care Initiative, which really has a vision of thinking about how we create a high quality, accessible childcare system that's supported through community connections while recognizing there's all kinds of ways to bring investment into childcare. The communities that care most about their families and their local economy are oftentimes the best ones to figure out the solutions. So that's really what we do. We do a lot of studies. We collect a lot of data. We recently collected childcare data for what we refer to as our state of childcare for Charlevoix and Emmett County, so that Little Traverse region. So we can better understand what's going on that local level. We also create tools that support childcare professionals in thinking about their business models and how to build their workforce in a very functional, positive way, because we know that the childcare workforce is incredibly undersupplied, which leads to many of our challenges with creating a strong system. And we also started a campus childcare program called the Early Learning Center. And that program is intended to provide a service to our student parents and community members, but it's also studying infant toddler care business models in particular, because in the state of Michigan, we have pre-K for all, and that expands access to preschool programs for children, and that's a wonderful thing, but that's not the same as childcare for working families and figuring out how to find care from the time they have to go to work till the time work is over, which isn't a typical school day. But also, pre-K for all doesn't address care needs for infants, toddlers, and 3-year-olds. So we're really focused on understanding that business model. So we are having a lot of fun with our new Early Learning Center. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. I'm also work on a regional level with our Regional Childcare Coalition, of which the state has 8. And we have a Northwest Regional Childcare Coalition, and I'm also the president of the Michigan Association for the Education of Young Children. So we're a statewide organization that focuses on quality early care and education in the state of Michigan, providing professional development supports, scholarships, an incredible annual conference, and lots of advocacy. And proud to be president of that because we are the largest affiliate in the country. We beat out California a year ago. So yes, we have a very large membership. So that's exciting stuff. So I'm here today to talk to you about our study that we did on Beaver Island, which commenced in the spring of 2025 and ran through, it's kind of started rather the fall of 2024 and we ended in the spring of 2025. So it was about a 6-month study. And I put together some slides to kind of walk us through some of the things that we learned. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want to invite anybody to ask questions at any point in time. Interrupt the slides in any way you'd like, and we can stop and have conversation about any thing you heard that you question or you have deeper curiosity about. And as Matt mentioned, we'll have time at the end also to discuss. Okay, so, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to. Okay, so there's our Child Care Initiative logo. Hopefully you start to see that all over the place over time. Okay, so as I mentioned, we did our study on Beaver Island, and that study was initiated by Will Sweikel, who's the superintendent of the schools there, but it really came out of inquiries from parents and staff that work at the school trying to get support for how to address childcare needs on the island. I think that it's really important for us to kind of ground ourselves in why this matters. Childcare matters throughout our region, throughout our state, for any family who is trying to grow their family, but also work in order to meet the economic pressures or just the personal fulfillment of being able to go to work. We really have to think about how can we support both children, but also support parenthood. And islands have some unique characteristics compared to the mainland, which you're all very familiar with, the uniquenesses of the island. But as it relates to childcare in particular, one is there are small labor pools on islands, and childcare is a sector that requires a lot of labor. That's one of the biggest challenges with it. You have to have, by rules and regulations, a certain number of people working with a certain number of children. So the demand for that labor, we are challenged on the mainland. Well, that means that challenge is just exponentially higher on an island. There are also seasonal swings, and you're going to hear that come up frequently as I share some of our findings with you. Islands tend to be very tourism driven, and needs in summer vary from needs in winter. And the fixed and isolated geography has a profound impact, right? It's less accessible for everyone to get to the island, to get off the island, and so on. So on the mainland, we see families who are struggling with accessibility, and they're just struggling due to a drive. So islanders are really struggling with accessibility to childcare. So those are a few of the challenges that we know we're working with. Um, the study that we did involved two primary components. We had a survey, but we also did a focus group. In addition, though, we did a lot of interviews because I had a colleague, Kristen Jarden, work with me on this study. She works specifically with our student parents through what's called our Family Friendly Campus Initiative. But she was available to help me out when another team member for the Childcare Initiative was not available. And so we did a lot of informal interviews. We did a lot of going around and talking to folks on the island, which is really important because we need to understand the context of the experience of folks who are trying to parent and work at the same time. So we were able to get a list of parents, mainly from the school district, but also we were connected to other families that the school district didn't necessarily have contact information on. We ended up surveying 12 families, and we had 9 parents attend the focus group. We had a 100% response rate from the 12 families that we had identified, so that was great. So it wasn't a huge undertaking. It's certainly replicable for anybody, but a lot of our work is about gathering the data that you need to make good decisions. And this study is an example of that. So folks were feeling this really high demand for childcare on Beaver Island. And while there is a demand, there wasn't data to support that the demand was any greater this last year than it was, 2 years prior, or in their sense that COVID brought many families to the island and therefore there was a much greater need. So sometimes we can see municipalities, we can see businesses, we can see groups want to build childcare capacity. And when you do that without good data, you can sometimes get yourself into trouble. So we focused on 4 areas to better understand the island landscape for childcare. We wanted to look at availability. Of the folks that responded, only 20% of them responded that they have the childcare that they need. That doesn't mean they didn't have any childcare. Many were relying on family, friend, and neighbors, and we see that quite frequently in very small rural communities. We wanted to look at cost and understand for those families that were paying for childcare, what were they paying? And so we found that they were spending 6 to 15% of household income on care, yet a third paid nothing. And so that's really important to keep in mind. It's really hard to pull somebody away from informal care that is little to no cost into a cost-based type of care. We also wanted to understand what kind of employer support there was, because in addition to starting with the data, we at the Child Care Initiative are, if you think back to our vision of thinking about how we create an early care and education system based on community supports, we really work to encourage employers to be active participants in addressing this infrastructure need to support their local economies and then therefore support their businesses. And those types of benefits vary widely, especially on the island. But a third of those families that responded weren't even sure if they had any benefits or childcare flexibility. Very commonly, childcare needs just aren't something that are discussed with an employer. And we're really trying to change that to just like transportation needs might be discussed with an employer, childcare needs are equally important. And then we wanted to understand the types of preferences that families had. Were they looking for a center, a traditional center base or family childcare program? Availability was a significant barrier. So that was our number one finding. And I don't think that was a surprise to any of us, right? Um, as I mentioned, they felt there was significant demand for childcare, but we didn't really see that. But what we did see is that there could be a slight increase in demand due to folks indicating they'd like to grow their families, whether it be through adoption, fostering, or just having another child of their own. Um, and availability being the number one barrier, cost was indicated as the second barrier. So this data is pretty consistent with what we see across the region. Cost, um, again, for a third of those families was not an issue because they were being supported from family, friends, and neighbors. One thing we did note is that that was not a surprise because in our more informal interviews, those young families, folks with children, about half of them were folks who had been born and raised on the island and they had that strong family network. And about another half of them were new to the island. They had moved to the island to be a teacher or because it was a place they had visited as a child and they loved it and they didn't really have a network of family who could help them out. So one of the challenges, though, that although family, friend, and neighbor care is of low or no cost, it also is one of the most unreliable types of care based on availability and the consistency of that care being available. And this third point, I want to really highlight here where it says the math cuts both ways. One of the things that we found that was a need in terms of availability and it relates to cost is that there were many families who only needed part-time care. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that because part-time care is really hard to sustain. Kind of jumping ahead a little bit, one of the greatest challenges we found with the potential of creating an island-based childcare center is the inconsistency of needs. There were, if you're a teacher working in the school, you don't want childcare in the summer, you only want childcare during the fall and winter. But if you are running a tourism business, you only need care in the summer, not in the fall and winter. And you would think those puzzle pieces would match up really well, but not necessarily because the time you don't need care, you don't necessarily, you want to be with your kids and you don't want to be paying for that childcare. So it's leaving that person who's trying to run that business with some real inconsistencies there. And again, like I mentioned, it's really hard to get families who are receiving family, friend, and neighbor care to leave that. So they may say that they want other care to be available, but when it comes down to paying for that care, that is where we see a true indication of need. Need is what they'd be willing to pay for. A third finding is that employer support's very inconsistent. So flexible work schedules and remote work is where we start with employer support, especially for folks who have an infant in that first year of life. This kind of employer support can be significant. And most commonly, only about a third of the folks who responded indicated that that was an option for them. The second most commonly desired employer support is paid maternity and paternity leave, which we do not have universally in the United States or in our state or in our region. Um, Having paid maternity and paternity leave was only reported by 22% of the employed respondents. And then PTO for childcare and or in a childcare and dependent care FSA. Those are least offered, most least frequently offered, but can have the greatest benefit to somebody who's trying to work and parent. And our fourth finding is what parents actually want. So 90% only wanted part-time or occasional care rather than full-time care. That makes it very hard to run a childcare business, which is labor dependent. 80% preferred a home-based setting with a smaller group of children. 70% needed flexible hours to accommodate their work schedule. So that would often indicate evenings and weekends, say somebody working in a restaurant or a bar. 50% worry about the potential cost of new childcare services. And for Beaver Island, that data marker was really, again, back to that, would I be willing to start paying for childcare if I'm not right now? So those were our four primary findings. Some of the things that really surprised us in the study is that informal care is really the background, but what they were feeling was the challenges with that. So it's not really it was the system for islanders, but it's not really a system that was perceived as sustainable. Most parents would enroll in new paid care, but they would not pay more than $1,000 a month. Um, You'll see that there's a reference to the true cost of care because our studies focus here at North Central Michigan College on what is the true cost and how do we think about investment in what the service truly costs, not what the current market rate is. Based on the current market rate of childcare, we have an undersupply of childcare workforce, and that's because we still have folks making around $14 an hour. So it's very hard to recruit and retain folks to work in the field. So we want our work to be focused on what it would really cost to pay somebody like the professional we're expecting them to be working with children and families. Now, if you think about $1,000 a month, that seems like a lot, but say somebody opens up an in-home childcare program and they can have 6 children maximum, and they have no children of their own. So they've just decided to open up this program. That only translates to about $72,000 a year, and that doesn't count, and that doesn't include any of their expenses that they may have, like their insurance, which would be significant, any of the materials and supplies that they need, if they provide any food, any increase in their utilities. And that doesn't even include things like the wear and tear on their household. And if this is a primary income, it doesn't include any benefits or retirement. So if we took all of that stuff off, that $72,000 is gone really quick. But if we take just some of those things off, it's not really a sustainable business. And that's if that island provider had 6 kids at all times. But what we heard is that folks don't want full-time care. They want part-time care or occasional care, or they needed care on weekends and evenings. So we can't have a facility that's open, run by one person that's open for 100 hours a week or something that would be needed. Parents consistently, this is across the board in all of our data, they prioritize safety, quality, but also staff qualifications over the location or meaning, home-based care. They preferred home-based care, what they preferred over home-based care was quality and qualified staff. Another finding that surprised us is subsidies are highly underused. In the state of Michigan, subsidies for childcare services for families in a low-income threshold are called CDC scholarships. And awareness of those scholarships being available was almost 0%. So that was very concerning. Because we found, based on our demographic data of the folks we surveyed, that many families would qualify for that scholarship. And we have a category of childcare licensing in Michigan called childcare exempt. So a family, say an aunt is taking care of 3 of her nieces and nephews just informally, she could actually become a license exempt provider. And those folks, those parents could be qualifying for childcare scholarships. And that aunt in this example could be receiving those funds. So building that awareness and enrollment is a big part of our recommendations. So before I get to what some of our recommendations were for the island, I just want to revisit some of the islandness layer, I called it, because it's important to keep these things in mind when we think about the recommendations that we provide. The seasonality, again, the small, stable population. Now, this was really interesting. One of the first data points we wanted from Beaver Island was, what has your school enrollment looked like? Because that's a really good indicator of how your population of young children has changed or may potentially be growing. And they really had a flat 10-year enrollment trend, right? So that reinforced our informal understanding that the demand wasn't really as great. It's just the voices were stronger at this moment. Provider recruitment would be a real challenge, again, back because of that small labor pool, and finding somebody who's qualified, although North Central Michigan College can help anybody become qualified. And then just that logistics of transportation to and from the island, when you're thinking of supplies that a provider would need, if substitutes were needed, getting folks from the state, childcare licensing and stuff over there to support the startup of programs and the licensing of programs. Those are certainly, every problem has a solution, but those are things that need to be considered. So what did we illustrate to them as childcare options? That was our first step that we did. And so we looked at 4 different types of childcare options that could possibly work in an island community. The first being a childcare cooperative. We don't see many childcare cooperatives on the mainland anymore. They're tricky because traditionally a cooperative meant that folks who hold shares in the cooperative also work as part of their time on the cooperative, and we're talking about working families. But it is a flexible and affordable option, and it really suits those part-time needs. One of the challenges is having the space available, and it really requires strong parent buy-in. It also would require probably hiring one staff member. But a cooperative is a way in which parents can be helping to meet those ratio requirements, those adult to child ratio requirements. A second was to recruit a family childcare provider. It wouldn't be the answer for all the needs that were illustrated, unlikely meeting the weekend and evening needs, but it could provide a stable childcare source for some folks. It would be easily eligible for those child development and care scholarships. And depending on the owner and operator, full or part-time care could possibly be an option. But the challenge is hinging on, can you recruit a willing provider, somebody willing to do it in their home? Now, an alternative that the state offers to that is called a small capacity center. And that's when somebody wants to do something like a family child care, but they don't want to do it in their home. But if they could find space, like a small classroom somewhere or something, they would do a small capacity center. In the state of Michigan, you can have up to 20 children in that center. Um, the challenge is you would need to find that space. It also requires recruiting an owner, and you need to have workforce for that. So anytime you go over 6 children in that family childcare setting, you need to have enough workforce to be in compliance. You also, for a small capacity center, have to have enough demand. And I've kind of I spoke to that a little bit, that the demand on Beaver Island didn't really indicate that a small capacity center would be sustainable, but it was an option to throw out there. It doesn't have to have up to 20 children either. It can have only 6 children or 8 children. And then another option was a nanny share. So flexible across a few family schedules, but it requires, families being in collaboration with this nanny share option. It's also a very, very costly option, typically at least $50,000 a year, and it's not eligible for CDC scholarship. So those were a couple of the potential options we threw out to them. What our final recommendations were, we had 5 recommendations. The first was to really expand subsidy access, especially for that license exempt population that I mentioned. How do we find those family, friend, and neighbor caregivers who are doing a lot of this work on the island and support them in becoming license exempt to qualify for CDC scholarship so they can be getting paid, but it also is helping the family. And they also have access to a lot of training through the state and the region. The second was I should have added this to the surprise as well, but really facilitating parent to parent connection. We were quite surprised. We went to a story hour at the library on Beaver Island, which was just amazing. And there were several children and families there, and there were actually folks who didn't know each other. We were so stunned by that. But a lot of great, um, especially cooperatives, a lot of great childcare grows out of a grassroots effort of those families making those connections, of starting to have playgroups, of helping each other out with taking care of each other's children. And then through those relationships, builds this opportunity to start a parent cooperative. And so that was something we strongly encouraged, was expanding those story times, creating a play group on the island where those families, right when they have an infant join the family, that they can start to get to know each other and create that grassroots infrastructure. Engage employers directly, really starting to talk to local employers about what they're experiencing and if it might be related to childcare and how they can start feeling more comfortable with talking about childcare. If there's an interest in providing space for childcare to get started, or even that idea of space for just parents to start having a play group together, so that over the next couple years, an island community can start to plant the seeds and then nurture this childcare system. The fourth was building seasonal and summer care models. So thinking about on Beaver Island, while there were folks who needed just care in the summer and folks who needed just care in the fall and winter, the majority of them needed care primarily in the summer. So how could maybe school space be used if you're on an island that has a school? How can that school space be used in the summer to at least address the summer care needs that currently exist? And then finally, increasing community awareness, which is another reason why I'm so grateful to have been invited to talk with you all today, because building awareness about what we do as communities to not just support children, but how do we support parenthood? Um, I recently visited Nordic countries to look at study primarily play and their early care and education systems that are more community based. And it's very striking how they just curate spaces within their communities that nurture and support childhood. Um, and I wonder why we struggle to do that here in the United States. And one theory is that we believe very much in parental independence, that, it's the parent's job or the parent's responsibility to support childhood. But then that begs the question, how do we support parenthood, right? So, how do we define that value in our actions as a community? So, all the opportunities that we have to build community awareness around childcare and around curating our communities for children and families is welcome. Um, where we specifically recommended Beaver Island go next is based on that data, based on some of the type of childcare systems we presented to them, and based on those 5 recommendations. At the focus group, there was a lot of energy and desire to move forward with a task force around childcare to really keep the conversation going, to really decide where they might go next. As consultants to do the study, we always invite island communities or other communities or employers, the 3 of which we do studies for, that we will stay on to help them continue on the work if needed. So that was not an option that Beaver Island took. And at the time, I didn't really feel it was necessary because they had so much momentum and enthusiasm going at that final focus group. Um, so that kind of summarizes our study. And I had my little timer set for 35 minutes and never turned it on. So hopefully I didn't go over.
You did not. You're perfect.
Okay, great. So, are there any questions or anything anybody wants to share about what your experience is for you and where you're located?
I'll jump in. I don't have children, but on Mackinac, the employer issue really resonated. That's something that has, I don't want to say plagued us, but it comes up constantly. There's so many jobs, some of which are year-round, and so few of them. I mean, I was surprised to see that it's only 22% that offered maternity leave, but then I got to thinking, I was like, that's probably true here too. It's that low.
Hmm.
I'm curious to know. Maybe this is a question for the whole group, but maybe for you specifically in Michigan. Do you have success stories of getting employers to add maternity leave to their offerings? Like, are there subsidies that they can get? Are there opportunities for employers to incentivize that to be added to their repertoire of offerings for employees? Because it can be a huge barrier. I mean, I
Hmm.
can I know lots of folks who got pregnant and had to quit their job, and we never saw
Hmm.
them again because their employer didn't offer that.
Right. We don't have currently in the state of Michigan any incentives to employers um, for maternity leave, a parental leave, or for childcare. We have federal incentives for childcare, but not for paid maternity leave. And that really sets us apart from other countries for sure. That's probably the most significant thing that sets us apart. We see, though, an uptick in employers beginning to offer that because they're starting to realize, like, okay, I will not be able to hire somebody else. And even if I could, the cost of hiring someone else is in that $20,000 to $30,000 range for that onboarding somebody new, depending on the type of role. So, in terms of our advocacy through the Child Care Initiative with our policymakers, it's all about how can we better incentivize um, employers to begin to value what the needs are of families, and knowing that in our country we need to be supporting birth rate and population growth. That's beneficial to us. And so we can't have that and not provide the necessary supports to make that happen. A big part of it is, again, back to that building awareness, right? That we have to shift that paradigm from this is just a parent's responsibility, or another common trope is I figured it out, they can figure it out too. Well, things are different now. The cost of living is significantly higher than it was 50 years ago. I think the number is like based on exponential growth of inflation, almost 400 times more. Cost of living is almost 400 times more now than it was 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, a lot of folks figured it out by I just left my job if I had a job, or I just stay home. And that's not really an option for folks anymore based on the cost of housing and transportation and food and just basic living. But there's also that piece of, especially you think of in the communities we live in with a lot of service industry, you want people being able to come to your restaurant or take advantage of your service that you're providing, and they can't do that if they don't have the income often of two families. Um, that being said, to get back to your specific question about paid maternity leave, um, that I think would be a game changer for a lot of families. We are seeing, unfortunately, this is one of those tensions that sometimes needs to be created that can be unfortunate, but is necessary, is that a lot of childcare programs now will not accept children until at least 3 months of age, where there are some who still will do that you can accept a child in childcare at any age in the state of Michigan. But some providers, our early learning center in particular is one example, but many are not until 3 months. We do have FMLA. So in Michigan, well, in the United States, you have to provide 3 months of leave for somebody, in this case for their maternity leave. But really, the only way somebody's getting paid is if they've banked up enough PTO, and that's if they have PTO. The other types of incentives that we do have for families include like FSA, dependent care accounts. That's another way that employers can support families. And we also have examples of employers who do cost sharing when families have access to childcare. We have more and more employers who are thinking about schedules from an equity sense and thinking about benefits even from an equity perspective, not an equality perspective. So you think about not putting somebody on a shift, that somebody who's a parent on a night shift. And while that might not seem fair, what is fair is if your business is functioning effectively and functioning well, and you have the workforce that you need. Many employers are finding that the pushback they thought they would get from other employees about that lack of equality really doesn't exist. That employees really are wanting to work in a positive work environment, whether they're benefiting from somebody who had a baby getting some time off or getting a different shift, more than they want to have an equal standing. So
Anybody
I've
else?
got a question or two, but Philip, are people able to unmute themselves,
Yeah, should be
or
able
is
to.
that okay? I'll leave it open for a minute to see
Yeah.
if any questions from the guests.
Do you happen to know if there's any benefits like that in Ohio? The CDC benefits?
I am confident there are CDC type benefits in Ohio, but I don't know exactly what they are. I'm happy though to look some of that up for you. Many benefits that we see related to childcare and preschool are benefits that states provide based on federal funds that they receive. So the federal government gives each state a block grant for childcare. and pre-K, childcare pre-K development, sort of basically birth to K. And then states individually decide how they will use that. But CDC subsidies in some form are pretty accessible in most states. But I can't say.
That's good to know. I never heard about that before. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah. And I would say Put-in-Bay has similar challenges to the study that you did on Beaver. Not quite as much. We're not, we're only a 20-minute boat ride from mainland, and we have quite a few boats that run all day. I know people that have sent their kids to daycare on mainland. Um, but yeah, we have a lot of the same struggles, and most people are relying on like a parent will watch a few other kids
Mhm.
or family members. I know my childcare with my 2-year-old is my mom, and that's pretty much it. Uh,
Mhm.
so my husband pulled back, like he's not working as much, so he's at home with my daughter more. So it's not overwhelming to my mom, who's 72,
Mhm.
can only handle a few hours at a time. So,
Yeah.
we had to make that decision, but because there's just no other options for us.
The struggle is real for sure. And we see more employers. I did an interesting visit to a charter school up in Hancock, Michigan, which is up by Copper Harbor. It's a charter school based on the Finnish approach to comprehensive education first through eighth grade, although they're building a high school now, so it's a very popular approach. But when I visited, the director of operations said one of the best changes they made was they just allow teachers to bring their babies to school for the first year. They have had 3 teachers do it, and they have had no issues arise that the children have no problem with the babies being around. If there's any significant challenges, one of the office staff will jump in and help out, but they've been able to retain teachers.
That's
By
great.
doing that. So that's just one example, but we see far more employers being open to that because again, they see the burden of losing a quality employee and then having to try and rehire. And be nice if we could create a system without creating these tension points, but unfortunately, this is where we're at. So, but Renee, I will look up what the name of the subsidy program is in Ohio and get that to Matt and Philip, and they can communicate that out to the group.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Matt, I
Well,
think you
for
had a
sure.
question.
I do. Yeah, I was giving it a second. Jen, can you talk a little bit about? I know this was a very broad overview of a project of an assessment. In a way, you were treating children, quote unquote, as a single monolithic group, which we know it isn't. And for example, I mean, you touched on, a newborn, caring for a newborn is very different than a 3-year-old.
Mhm.
Then you also have children with special needs. And so there's a variety of care within, for each child. Can you talk about how that might come into play? And I'm guessing it just exacerbates it, makes it even more complicated when you when you consider all the unique needs of children.
Mhm. Well, certainly if an island has a school, like in the case of Beaver Island, and as I mentioned in the state of Michigan, we have the pre-K for all initiative. So that means most schools, municipalities have a preschool that is accessible to almost all 4-year-olds at this point in time. And so childcare now has really become that infant, toddler, 3-year-old care that we see the need for. And so much like those preschoolers now have a place that they can access, special education services then therefore are accessible in that 4-year-old setting. In Michigan, we have what's called early on. And early on is what the special education services service entity is for those infants through 3-year-olds. But not all providers or families know about early on or how to access those supports. And so, one thing that is really important is ensuring that that's why having a childcare provider who's knowledgeable and educated in early care and education is so important because that provider then becomes that resource for the parent to help them figure out how to navigate those needs if they have a child with special needs. So I think that much like the lack of awareness of CDC scholarships, building that knowledge around what services are available is certainly a first step of something that an island community can do to be supporting children and families. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Jen, one of the things that GLIA is trying to do is build a directory of resources for islanders to use to find things like this. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if there a good one-stop shop to find links to things like the CDC scholarships and support programs that that folks in rural communities can access? Is there a place that you go to get that info?
Well, certainly each state has a website about where their child development block grant funds go towards. They don't necessarily say this is where our CD block grant money is going to, but they have some form. So I'll also send those to you. They're not always comprehensive, but like in Michigan on that web page, you're going to see CDC early on, pre-K for all, you're going to see all of that kind of information. So yeah, I'm happy to pull that together for essentially representing Ohio and Wisconsin and Michigan. Ontario has, different services and resources available. Also not as knowledgeable, of where to access all of that information. But for the
Yeah, that's
states, I can
fair.
send that out.
Yeah, even just for Michigan. Yeah, I'd be
Mhm,
curious to get some of those links on file for us so that we can send
mhm.
our folks there.
Well,
We
I
got a
don't
few
know if
minutes left.
you,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, Jen, if you would, I would love if you could drop your email in the chat there. I'm not sure I saw it in the final slide, your contact information, and um, I'll give you a bit of a marketing PR bump here. If I'm guessing if other islands out there are interested in replicating to some degree what you guys did for Beaver, is there an opportunity to do that, and what might that look like?
Yes, absolutely. You can just reach out to me. Um, and also sometimes we establish contracts. So depending on what the folks on each island are looking for, we create a contract. Um, and then we come to the island, like I described with Beaver Island, and we get to know folks and we do the survey and we do the focus groups and we create the report for you. But we also are always happy to share the survey, right? If a community leader just wants to gather the data themselves and create their own task force to do that, we will always share those kinds of resources as well. If a contract is out of the means of what the island's resources are at the time, or perhaps it's a smaller population and they feel that they can gather the data on their own, they're just not really sure what questions to ask, we can always provide those as well. I Let me share quickly here where you also can find more information about the Childcare Initiative. Sorry. If you go to our North Central Michigan College webpage here, and you go to community and events, you can see Childcare Initiative. Also, if you're curious, our Early Learning Center has a spot. And so you can see that where our state of childcare, again, that was for our Little Traverse region there, but all of our other publications are available here. So you can kind of get a sense of what it is that we do. This is a comprehensive assessment that we did of 5 different employment sectors. We wanted to understand if employers were going to support childcare, what does it look like for manufacturing versus a small business versus a hospital and so on. And then wrote about some of our thoughts around building the workforce capacity. So that's another, when you go to our webpage, you can, our website, you just go to community and events and find us there. So we're all about how do we make childcare happen in some way, and thinking it's not just a center, right? It's about all these other things where it's about caring for children and supporting parenthood. So you might even just want to start a play group. It all starts somewhere.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was intrigued by the nanny share option and some of those other things I had never thought about that I think what could be, albeit costly, as you said, could be an opportunity for a community out there to try.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for this presentation. This was super, super interesting. Even as somebody who doesn't have kids, I'm thinking about all of my friends who do and all the opportunities that are out there for them. So, um, for those of you who are still here, this did get recorded. If you have friends who you think this would help, this will be on YouTube in a couple of days. So we'll send out a link to everybody in GLIA and you can share it out to your friends. But thank you again, Jennifer, for joining us today, and thanks everybody for logging on in the middle of your busy week to learn about childcare on islands.
Thank you all so much. So appreciate it.